Welcome back to the summit. Still with us, our feisty panelists, Dr. Hania Zubaydah, Dan Perry, and Josh Hasten. Thank you, gentlemen, for staying with us. We're also staying on topic, but before we get back to our conversation, I do want us to take a look at some data. A fresh weekend poll by the Israeli public broadcaster Khan indicates that a majority of Israelis are pessimistic about the country's future. We're talking 48% of respondents believing the situation in Israel is only going to get worse in the coming years. Just 20% think things will improve. Compared to the same question asked shortly after the last elections, 42% then believed the situation would worsen, meaning that in the past 5 months, 6% more people feel the situation is going to deteriorate. And when asked whether they felt represented by the Benjamin Netanyahu government, 60% said no. Just 27% saying yes. And by the way, when it comes to the judicial overhaul, 53, a majority, believe it is harmful. 32 think it is beneficial. So let's get to it, gentlemen. Another quick fire round, 30 seconds each. Is separation non-democratic? Simply put, Dan Perry.
Look, you could say a separation might be undesirable. You can say it might be impractical, mainly because it would be difficult to defend the rump coastal modern Israel. But I don't see why it's undemocratic for two groups that decide they don't belong together to live apart. It would be something of a tragedy for Zionism in a way, but it would also be tragic for the outcome of Zionism to be an undemocratic Jewish supremacist theocracy governed by extremist rabbis.
Josh Hasten, your thoughts?
Yeah, and I don't know if it's democratic or undemocratic. I think the real issue here is it realistic or unrealistic? And in my opinion, it's absolutely not a realistic option at this point. We need to show unity. We need to get back on the same page. I've been here now over 20 years. Unfortunately, I think this is as low or as bad as it's been internally. But as they say, we survived Pharaoh, and we'll survive this too, even though that was an outside enemy. We'll get through this point in our history, and we'll move forward.
Dr. Hania Zubaydah.
If I mentioned Benedict Anderson, let me mention Rousseau. Let me mention Hobbes, Locke. The state is a voluntary association. When almost 50% do not want to belong in this voluntary association, they should say goodbye. And pay attention, this entire discourse we're having, we forgot one small thing, the name, Arabs. We have 20% of them within the state of Israel, and in the occupied territories, we have a few other millions residing and still waiting to hear what's going to happen with Israel. So let that be another issue.
And speaking of Rousseau, perhaps the fundamental issue here is that in the frameworks of the social contract, we do not believe that it's better to stick together than each for his own. And now, gentlemen, let's feel free to interact. Practically speaking, will new elections solve the problem or just deepen it, Josh?
Listen, we've already had 5 elections. Will a 6th election solve the problem? I don't think so. Again, you will probably pacify if, in fact, let's say the Likud gets less number of seats in the next election. You might pacify those who are marching every Saturday night with the goal, whether it's admitted or not, under the guise of judicial reform. They really want to overthrow this government and go to a 6th election. That's really the goal. So, again, I don't know if that's going to solve the issue. But I really think that's the intent. That's the intention of these protests every week. People aren't happy with Netanyahu. People aren't happy with Ben-Gvir and with Smotrich. But again, I go back to my original point. These people formed a coalition back in November, which has not been respected from day one. They haven't had the opportunity to prove themselves. And of course, I have issues with this government as well. No government is perfect. But I think people here, when you're talking about blocking ministers' homes, blocking MK's homes, not allowing them to vote, not allowing them to go to the Knesset, shutting the doors of the Kohelet Policy Forum, this is way, way out of bounds. And I think this
the same thing was done to the previous government by your camp. It's the exact same thing.
What democracy really is.
Complete demonization of the Bennett-Lapid government was done by the right-wing camp. Look, I think I can point to a way forward, okay? The past 5 elections were largely a tie, as was the previous one, okay? 50-50 in almost each case. If the coming election will result, as all the polls currently show, in a swing to the left, left, that would be because a shock to the system had been administered by the effort to reform the country into an authoritarian one, similar to the Second Intifada that caused a lurch to the right 20 years ago. That could happen. And if that happens, and the result is a centrist government with the center-left plus the Likud in a post-Bibi era, attacking the issue of internal covenants between the religious and the secular in between people in Israel, that could really change things. And it's very important. I have to say this. People don't understand. The goalposts are moving all the time because of the phenomenal, and I would say reckless, Haredi birth rate, which, if it continues as is, will take them from a sixth of the country today to a majority. And these are people who refuse, it's a sector that refuses to adopt a core curriculum, that insists on salaries, in some cases lifelong salaries for yeshiva students, that has the lowest participation rate in the economy of any other sector in Israel, and essentially is subsidized. This lunatic house of cards cannot continue, and this is what's driving the fear on the left, the constantly moving goalposts that is the implication of the Haredi birth rate. That whole arrangement with them, the accommodation with them, is driving all this because they are the main sector that wants to reform the system to eliminate the power of the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court,
apparently,
because the principle of equality
the secular value of equality was given a price tag this past week when it comes to the debate over exempting ultra-orthodox students from serving in the army. So that's the other side of the political aisle that again put a price on the value of equality. But circling back to what Dan said, Dr. Zubaydah, is it indeed a swing to the left according to what we're seeing in polls, with a grain of salt, etc., etc., or is it the rise of some sort of an extreme center, so to speak?
We'll never know until we get to the elections. Let me just remind my colleagues two things. One, this is the 25th election Israeli had, not the 5th election. Two, there was an election almost like 2 years ago. Bennett was chosen to be the prime minister under the coalition, and everything was done to dethrone him, go to another election, which is okay. It's legitimate. It's democracy, and that's a good thing. Third, I don't like the argument about birth rates and so on. If you have an issue with the birth rate of the Haredim, go make children or do something else. But the birth rate is the birth rate. I'm not getting into the womb or the family planning of any other group. May that be any group. However, and this is important, let me say that you cannot disqualify the Arabs as a legitimate member of the Israeli coalition. And this has been done by the right on a constant basis. While they are arguing, you cannot tell us how many children to bring to the world. That doesn't work this way. If you want a democracy, democracy acts both ways. The Arabs can be a legitimate part of the coalition, and the Haredim can bring as many children as they want. And one more question which looms, and that is an important question. People who live outside the borders of the Israeli state, and these the occupied territories, and what will be done with them. Because now, the people who are holding the occupied territories are what you call...
Of course, but guys,
Dan,
one quick point.
We're nearing the end of the discussion,
Ellie,
and I want to let Josh... Dan, in one sentence so we can hear Josh, please.
Now, I was just going to say, it seems like everything would be hunky-dory if we just allow the left or left of center back in power. We've gone down that road before. We've seen what the left or left of center has brought us. We're talking about the disaster of the Oslo Accords. We're talking about the so-called Second Intifada. So we've been down that path before. I think we should allow this government the opportunity, as it hasn't had a chance to. It's been busy dealing with all these protests. Give them a chance to rule, because they were elected to do so.
Okay, Dan Perry, wrap it up for us. Yeah.
So I don't know if in the end Israel and Judea will separate. I think probably not. But what might happen is cantonization of Israel, a sort of federalization, because there is simply no way on earth that you can expect the secular people of the coastline to put up with religious rule and endless conflict with the Palestinians. If that is what the right wants, there's going to have to be some kind of federalization. And if I had to guess, that's where things are headed.
Israel is turning into Switzerland, maybe that's not such a bad thing. On that note, Dr. i24NEWS, Josh Hasten, and Dan Perry, thank you very much for this 2 minutes, and we're back with more.